Hey everyone, welcome to Miniature Painting 101, my new Tuesday video series where I will be covering how to paint a miniature through all the steps of preparation, including cleaning the model, removing it from its sprues, possibly pinning, through the entire painting process, base coats, layers, shades, color matching, all the way to post painting, such as basing, varnishes, how to protect your miniatures. Welcome to part 5 of the series, which I call Preparation of Plastic Miniatures. So plastic miniatures are becoming increasingly common in games such as Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, and now in Privateer Press, which they're bringing in a hybrid of plastic and resin. Some pros of plastic miniatures are, number one, that they're very lightweight. 2, they stay together actually very well once glued. 3, they're easier to assemble actually because the lightweight parts are easier to glue together. And finally, they're easier to paint as paint tends to stay on plastic miniatures easier than metal miniatures. However, as nothing's perfect, there are also some cons to plastic miniatures. The first one is the pieces tend to be very thin plastic, so the individual pieces can break easily. Number 2, sometimes, depending on the way it's made, the miniature can fall over quite easily. And third, the associated value with plastic miniatures. People tend to not be as happy when paying $50 for a set of 5 very thin plastic miniatures when compared to metal miniatures. And as I mentioned, metal miniatures are being phased out at the moment in a lot of the major games. So definitely expect more plastic miniatures in the future, which is actually pretty cool because the current technology, resin and plastic, you get much more detail in those models than you would normally get with the metal miniatures. So here's what you will need to prepare a plastic miniature. First, you need the miniature itself. Second, you need a hobby knife and hobby cutters, and preferably a cutting mat. Another optional thing would be a hobby file. And finally, you will need glue, either super glue or plastic glue, as you have the option with plastic miniatures. An optional step, if you want to use it, is when to clean the model, is detergent, a brush, and a towel. So, for this video, I will show you how to assemble a Kroot from the Tau Army of Warhammer 40k. As you can see, it is part of a sprue containing many Kroot members of the squad, like most plastic miniatures. The first phase is what I call the cleaning phase, where you remove very cleanly the parts of the miniature from the sprues. Now this takes a set of hobby pliers or hobby cutters, and I recommend cutting quasi close to the part itself without going so close that you risk endangering cutting the end off the part. As you can see, I take my time and I make sure I do a clean cut, that way you don't damage any of the pieces before you start cleaning them and painting them. The next part about this phase, once you have all the pieces, is to remove the excess molding from the remainder of removing them from the sprues. The easiest way to do this is just using a hobby knife and cutting out the parts, as well as I recommend inverting the knife and just dragging it along the surface away from you. And that way you can quickly remove it. As you can see, there's a piece here, and just cutting it away quickly with a hobby knife is actually very easily done with these plastic miniatures. And as I mentioned before, whenever using a hobby knife, always cut away from yourself. And then the other option is you can use a hobby file, like seen here, to remove these excess lines from the miniature. Another very important step is the removal of all mold lines from a plastic miniature. Plastic minis tend to have very extreme mold lines, which is just the result of the molding process. If left on the model, they really do take away from the overall paint job. Even if you do an amazing paint job and you see mold lines, it really does take away from the overall effect. The best thing you can do is use your hobby knife and gently scrape away these excess lines. As I said, just inverting the knife and scratching the miniature in a direction away from you. The next important step is the washing phase, where you use soap and detergent to wash the miniature. To see exactly how it's done, please refer to my previous tutorial for metal miniatures. It's the exact same process, therefore I decided not to show it again in 2 tutorials. However, it is worth mentioning that plastic models don't tend to have as harsh of a residue as metal miniatures, and therefore, though it's not required, I do recommend it depending on the miniature company that you're using. And finally, there is the assembling phase, the part where you put all of the pieces of the miniature together. Unlike metal miniatures, plastic miniatures tend to be very light pieces. Therefore, you don't actually tend to need to reinforce the bond between pieces. However, this being said, a lot of people still do use magnets in order to be able to swap out parts for plastic miniatures. Due to their lightness, magnets actually are an awesome way to be able to swap out pieces between different variants on the same model. For example, guns or just other types of equipment. When gluing together plastic miniatures, you actually have 2 really good options for the types of glue you can use. The first one is super glue. Super glue, the benefits of super glue include that it involves a very quick bond, so you don't need to hold the pieces together for a long time. It's a pretty strong bond overall, and it can be used on any surface. Therefore, you can use this on pre-painted pieces, as well as if you decide to put the model together before you paint it. The other type of glue that you might use is plastic glue. This type of glue has a very slower bond, so it takes a lot more time to hold the pieces together. However, what it basically does is melt 2 pieces of plastic together, so once it dries, this bond is incredibly solid, much stronger than super glue. But the downside is, though, it is very difficult to use plastic glue on surfaces that have already been painted, because it needs 2 plastic surfaces to glue them together. Therefore, it is highly recommended if you like to glue your models together before painting, but it becomes a little bit more difficult when gluing them together after you've painted them. Once you've chosen your adhesive, for example, I will use plastic glue in this example, begin putting the pieces together. If there's not an exact instructions on how to put the model together, I highly recommend attaching the legs to the base or the main body to the base. That way it gives you something to hold, and it also establishes how the legs and the overall body will be looking. Once you know how they'll be standing, it's much easier to figure out how you want the arms and the head to look, and it gives a much more dynamic and awesome looking pose. As I mentioned, when using plastic glue, remember to hold for extended periods of time. It doesn't really easily show in this example, but I'm holding the pieces for about 25 to 30 seconds to ensure that the bond is very strong. And then continue putting the pieces together until you're done. Just to tell you as well, with plastic glue you tend to get these very thin strings of excess glue. Keep your eye out for them and definitely remove them before they have a chance to dry, because they will leave little lines or little indentations on your model when it dries, and you don't want that because it'll take away from the overall effect of the nice clean model. And once again, you'll notice that I'm trying to put it in more dynamic pose. Obviously these arms are moving, so it's more of an action pose. This model will be looking forward, about to attack somebody out of the blue, and it's much more cooler looking than just arms at the sides and head straight forward. I like to give my head slightly a little bit of an angle, so it makes it look like they're looking around and more aware of their surroundings. Also with plastic models, there can be slight gaps between pieces when dry. I would recommend using green stuff, and I will be doing a tutorial in the future about all the possible uses of green stuff, whether it be solidifying bonds or gap filling or possibly sculpting as well. So expect that in future tutorials. And here's the result, a very nice, clean plastic model which is ready to be primed and to be painted. So I hope you enjoyed part 5 of Miniature Painting 101. Stay tuned for next week when I go in depth over on how to prepare resin models for painting, which will include cleaning up the model, bending fine cast, and gluing it together in preparation to be painted. So thank you to all you awesome people once again for watching and subscribing to my videos. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will hope to continue to make this series. To anybody who watched it, please leave a comment if you think I missed anything in the comment section below. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel if you already haven't done so. So thank you once again, and until next time, this is Jay saying, happy painting everyone.